Morning guys. Couldn't figure out how to be in two places at once yet, so decided to videotape myself showing you how to do the next step of what we're going to do. Yesterday we talked about doing one function first and then another function, and doing the inverse of that by doing the second function first and doing the first function second. Kind of looked at that. Today we're going to talk about creating an inverse function. So to create an inverse function, we're going to start out with a pretty basic function. F of x equals 2x plus 1. What I want to find is f of 3. Now in order to find f of 3, I'm going to do some things to x. Well, we know when we have a 3 here, we're going to substitute that in for x. So if I have 2x plus 1, I can ask myself, what am I doing to the x? Well, first, I'm multiplying by 2. Because order of operations says multiply before you add. And second, I'm going to add 1. So if I take 3 and I multiply it by 2, I get 6. When I add 1, I get the number 7. Now the true inverse function can be created by doing the opposite of each step in the opposite order. So if I want to undo this, I'm going to do the opposite in the opposite order. So if I started with multiplying by 2 and then added 1, the first thing I'm going to try and undo is this add 1. We all know that to undo and add 1, we subtract 1. So the first thing I'm going to do is x minus 1. Now I want to do the opposite of this. The opposite of multiply is divide, and I keep my numbers the same. Divide by 2. And I'm going to put parentheses on the top because it's always going to help me to understand exactly what I'm doing first. I will call this function g of x. Now I have created two functions right here. Well, what if I take 7 and put it into this function? So we took 3, we got out 7 for the primary function. Now second, we're going to take 7 and put it in for g of x. This box is g of x. Here, 7 minus 1 gives me 6. Six divided by 2 gives me 3. Now, the inverse function, so we created a function, we did something, the inverse function will undo that. Just like when you raise x plus 2 to the 1/3 to the third again, the third and 1/3 will cancel out and create a power of 1, giving you your original statement. Here, f of x equals 2x plus 1. G of x equals x minus 1 over 2. These are called inverse functions. This is a true inverse function. Yesterday we were looking at solely how to reverse the process, so to use the inverse to change the order in which we do things. Today we're looking at doing something to a number and then undoing it. Okay? Now, let's look at a little more complex example. If x squared plus 3. Hopefully, you can all tell me that what I'm doing to x is first squaring it. So step 1 is square. Step 2 is add 3. Now, if I wanted to find f of 4, f of 4 is going to be 4 squared, which is 16, plus 3, which will give me 19. Now to undo these steps, I'm going to reverse the order. So if I did square and then add, now I'm going to do subtract and then unsquare, which we all know we call square rooting. Step 1 becomes subtract 3. Step 2 becomes square root. Now all I have to concern myself is, well, how do I write this? Well, first I'm going to put my x here. What am I going to do to x first? Subtract 3. Well, put that in parentheses then, because we know subtract is typically the last thing you'll do if in order of operations. The second thing I'm going to do is square root. Now I've got f of x here and g of x there. Is g of x going to undo this and get me the number 4 again? Well, what is 19 minus 3? 19 minus 3 is 16. You substitute in this number here for x. 19 minus 3 is 16. The square root of 16 is, and this is important, plus or minus 4. Now the reason I put in plus or minus is because if I didn't work with the number 4, but I worked with a negative number, we need to know that same thing. So let's do this same example. Except let's find f of negative 3. F of negative 3 is going to be negative 3 squared plus 3. Negative 3 times negative 3 is a positive 9.
Attention all staff.
Plus 3 is
The
going to be
Books
12.
Are Fun orders are due this morning. If you wanted to order any of the Books Are Fun products from the Teacher's Lounge,
And now I've got to
please
wait for
come down and put your
announcements.
checks and ABs in the envelope that is with the exhibit. Any teachers that would be able to help cover classes today, if you could please call the main office. We've got about 18 classes that need covered today, so if anyone can help, please call me.
Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is try and undo that. So the first thing I'm going to do is take 12 minus 3 is 9. The square root of 9, typically you're going to say is 3. But we also know that the square root of 9 could be plus or minus 3. This becomes my answer. I got negative 3 out when I put negative 3 in. That's how you find the inverse of functions. Now one thing to note is we did 2 examples that only had 2 steps. There will be several times where you'll have more than 2 steps. For instance, if you had f of x equals 2x plus 3 squared. Here, my steps are multiply by 2. That's the first thing I do to x. Then I subtract, add 3. And the last thing I'm going to do is square. So to find the inverse of this, I'm going to unsquare, which is square root. Then I'm going to subtract 3. And then I'm going to divide by 2. So g of x will look like x, well, let's put the square root there. Then I want to subtract 3. Then divide by 2. This will be the square root of x minus 3 divided by 2. 3 steps, 2 steps, you're always going to do the opposite order and the opposite operation.